we are going to hop into it. We are in week 3 of Joseph, okay? And the good news is that this week things start to kind of take a good turn for Joseph, a positive turn. If you remember, he has so far in his little, not little story, but in his story, he has been sold into slavery by his brothers, all right? Then as a servant, he was doing pretty well. He rose to the top of his master's house. Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh, he rose to the top of his house, had authority over everything, only for Potiphar's wife to ruin everything. She wanted to sleep with him. He resisted her, and she made up a story. She lied about him, and he was sent to prison. And then we're left off with, even in prison, he is given authority, right? He rises to the top. The captain of the guard of the prison trusts him to basically take care of everything. Finally, this week we'll see Joseph kind of work his way out of those problems, out of that strife, and we also get kind of more of a clear picture of why God would allow those things to happen in the first place. So we're going to be in Genesis 40. We're going to be in verse 8. Basically, Joseph has been given authority in prison. We're picking up a little bit after that, in which the Pharaoh's baker and the Pharaoh's cupbearer, he's mad at them. It doesn't say what they did, it just says that Pharaoh was offended, so he threw them in prison. And he threw them in the same prison that's on the estate or at the house of the captain of the guard. He threw them in that same prison in which Joseph is in, okay? By the way, if you don't know what a cupbearer is, basically it was just customary, or there was a job that one person had to take the drink from Pharaoh and drink it before Pharaoh to make sure it wasn't poisoned. And if that person fell over dead, then they knew it was poisoned and they wouldn't give it to Pharaoh, right? So maybe not the greatest position, but apparently better than being in prison. So basically what happens is Joseph sees these two men and they're upset, and he asks them why they're upset. My first thought would have been they're in prison, but apparently it's something else that is causing them to be upset that he recognizes. So he asks them, what is making you upset? And in Genesis 40, verse 8, this is how they answer. They say, we both had dreams, they answered, but there is no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Now, I know we just started, but I'm going to cut in real quick and just say that. Notice what Joseph does here. He never takes credit for being able to interpret dreams. Not once. You'll never see him take credit for doing it. He will always redirect and say that God is the one who is capable of doing that. And I think it's just important to recognize that, to point that out. Joseph is not looking for credit for himself. He recognizes who has the power and who does things. He recognizes that God is the one who interprets dreams. Remember, they think of dreams as a way that God communicates with them. Well, if God is the one communicating the dream, of course, he's going to know the answer. And Joseph knows this as well. So that's what he says to them is, does not God hold all interpretations? Is he not over all of them? Tell me your dreams in this sort of fashion of, I have a relationship with him. Tell me your dreams and let's see what he has for you. Continuing in verse 9, it says, the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. Joseph says, this is what it means. Joseph said to him, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. All right, I just want to stop and say that we notice Joseph still has hope here, right? Like I talked about last week, that I can get in my own head when things start to happen. I can get kind of bitter and pouty, and I let that kind of take over a little too much. Joseph is not dealing with that. He still has hope. He still has trust that he's going to get out of the trial that he's in, that it's not going to be forever. And so we see that by him just asking, go ahead and remember me, because this may be a way for me to escape or me to get out of the place that I'm in. He's not lost on hope. He still has hope of leaving where he's at. 16, it says, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Not that it's important, but anytime I read this story, I just always really feel bad for the baker. Like, he was already upset. He hears that his buddy got a really good interpretation. He's like, I'm just trying to make me feel better. And this is what Joseph gives him, or kind of lays down the hammer like, well, you're not going to feel better. In fact, you're going to be dead in 3 days. So it continues in 20. It says, now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So again, we see in chapter 40 that Joseph does something righteous. He does something well. He acts and conducts himself the way that he's supposed to. And yet, through no control of his own, somebody else's shortcomings, somebody else's mistakes, he is forgotten, and so he's left in prison, right? Again, this could have been an opportunity for him to get out, but because somebody else messed up, because somebody else made a mistake, once again, he is negatively affected in his life because of somebody else's actions. It has nothing to do with what he did, has nothing to do with how he acted. It's not that he deserved any punishment. It's just that someone else said they would do something, and then they did not do it, and he's negatively affected. Out of all the things Joseph is negatively affected by, we could argue this is one we're most familiar with. We ask somebody to do something, we trust them to do it, and then they don't do it, and then think of the stress, the frustration that goes along with understanding that they did not do it, right? The good news is that a lot of us are not stuck in prison because of them not doing what they're supposed to. Unfortunately, Joseph is, and he's actually in prison for another 2 years until Pharaoh has a dream, all right? And Pharaoh has a dream. He can find no one to interpret it. He can't figure out what it means. And that is when the chief cupbearer figures out or remembers where he messed up. And so in Genesis 41, just a chapter over, Genesis 41, verse 9, it says, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream, and things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Now, I'll just kind of go ahead and say that this answer by Joseph is like super gutsy. All right, understand what's happening here. He's pulled out of the prison. He's finally going to get recognition for what he did for the cupbearer and the baker. And you would just imagine, like, just hearing what Pharaoh, the fact that Pharaoh is desperate to know what his dream means. You kind of get this impression that if Joseph gives Pharaoh what he wants, there's a good chance he's not going back to prison, right? Like, Pharaoh's going to reward him for giving him what he wants. And so Joseph has to know this too. And yet, if you notice, Joseph still corrects what Pharaoh said and makes sure he knows that God is the one in control, right? I'm going to just take a wild guess and say that most people didn't make it a habit of correcting Pharaoh. When Pharaoh said something or tried to give you credit for something, they probably weren't like, no, you're wrong. Actually, it's this way. But Joseph actually does it. Joseph is bold and just says, no, I can't do it for you. God can give you the answers you want. I watch a lot of sports. Y'all know this. Emily gets frustrated at sports players sometimes. And here's why she gets frustrated at them. She gets frustrated at them because they act like children while they're playing the game that they're playing. Okay? They'll throw a fit sometimes or they yell at the ref. And I've tried to explain to her that, I have a theory about this, that there may be something that's going on with this. And so here's what I explained to her is that whether you take football or basketball, whichever one you want to take, when these young kids are in high school, right, and they're playing for their school teams, you have to realize they're the best player on that team and the other team by a mile, okay? They are a dominant player when they play. And what that causes is that a lot of these kids that play professional now, a lot of them won state championships, and we're talking like multiple state championships. So we'll take basketball for an example and say that their team, on average, probably went like 20-1 during the season, then never lost another game for 10 more games, and they were state championships. So that year they went 30-1. They won 30 times, lost once. All right? And say they do that back-to-back years. Now they're 60-2, okay? They're not accustomed to losing. They go to college, and because they were really good in high school, the best colleges recruit them, right? So you get to college, and they may go, for basketball specifically at Duke, at North Carolina, they may go 23-3 at college, okay? So, and if they stay in college for 1 year, after that, they're suddenly a professional basketball player, and they're on the worst team in the league. Okay? So here's what I'm saying in this is that they're so accustomed to winning in the 3 or 4 years before they get to professional sports. They may go something like 90-6. They may lose 6 games in 4 years. They are accustomed to being elite and winning. And so then they're thrust into a situation where the worst team got to pick them, and their team is horrible now, okay? And because their team is horrible, they're losing way more than they're accustomed to. And so my theory is that they get this attitude, right, of like, well, of course I'm frustrated, of course I'm throwing fits. And I try to explain to Emily, I'm like, look, they're 22, you got to give them some time to be mature, because look, they're not used to all this losing. And then they're not used to having to go do a press conference where they're like, well, why'd y'all lose again? And they have to talk about it, right? Like, they're not accustomed to that. And so, of course, they're frustrated, they're acting a certain way. I say all that to say, what we notice here, and what I want you to recognize in Joseph, is that Joseph does not have this problem because he has not been winning. Okay? We could argue that as far as life goes, he's kind of been losing a lot. And what that builds in you is, it has built in Joseph this recognition that I'm not the one who makes myself win. He knows what he's capable of, what he's not capable of. A lot of these things have been out of his control, and it would be these trials and stuff that would help him recognize I'm not the one who controls everything in my life, but God is the one who controls everything in my life. And so it's important to understand that there are some of these setbacks, these trials that we go through, and what those trials and setbacks do is they reveal truths in us. And sometimes those truths are hard, but they reveal these truths in us, and they cement character in us. They help us recognize that, well, I'm not the person who's always the best in the room or the most qualified, but number one, God is always the one who's in control. He's the one who dictates what happens with me. But even outside of that, there are other people that are capable and can be used. This is what makes a good leader, is when they recognize that they're not the only one with talent, but they know how to use other people's talent, right? But it's these setbacks, these trials that reveal that in us. Because if we're just accustomed to winning, if all we've ever experienced is being successful without trying, then of course we're going to get frustrated. We're going to get upset when a setback, when suffering happens, because we're not used to it, right? It's going to be hard for us to adjust. But we see here that Joseph has already adjusted to this. He knows who's in charge. He knows who has authority, and he makes it clear to Pharaoh, I'm not the one who interprets dreams. but God will give you the answers that you want. All right. Continuing in 17, it says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. I'm going to be honest and say this first dream's a little scary to me. I feel like if I had it, I'd be a little freaked out. After these fat and sleek cows, the good cows came up, after them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. So he has a second dream now. He says, In my dream I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. All right, so I chopped out some of the verses here. You're welcome to go read them in chapter 41, but I'm just speeding it up so we get out of here in a reasonable amount of time. Unless, if you want me to talk for 40 minutes, I can. Basically what happens is Joseph tells Pharaoh what the deal is. All right, he tells him that number one, God gave him, that both dreams mean the same thing, and God had him dream it twice because it is something that is definitely going to happen. God is adamant that this is going to happen. And he tells him that the good cows, the good grains, or the good stalks, those are 7 years. There's 7 of them. There's 7 years of abundance, right? And he tells them that that abundance, during that abundance, Egypt will have or produce more than usual. And then he tells them that the ugly stalks, the ugly cows, are 7 years of famine that will come after the abundance, and it will wipe away any abundance that Egypt had. And so this is what he suggests to Pharaoh. Again, talking about a guy from prison, he's now telling Pharaoh how he should run his country, okay? He tells Pharaoh what you should do is you should get somebody to be over what you produce in the years of abundance, and you should take 1/5 of that stuff that you produce and you should store it away so that in the years of famine, you will still have food for your people and be able to provide, right? This is what he lets him know. And so it continues in Genesis 41. He says, The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Some Bibles say in the spirit of the gods. In Pharaoh's head, he's not necessarily mentioning God the Father. He's saying, obviously, this man has got some information the rest of us don't. He says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, Make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Sorry, y'all, my nose is stuffy, which makes my mouth dry because I'm breathing through it. So not only that, if you read a little further, he gives Joseph a new name. He gives him a wife. The wife has 2 sons for him during the years of abundance. Joseph is ultimately, obviously, blessed in a massive way. I don't know how else to kind of say it or explain it other than, like, in my head, man, God just does crazy things sometimes. Like, he can come up with a solution that you never thought was possible to fix the problem that you're in. Right? Or whatever you think you're facing, it seems that God can just crumble whatever wall is in your way very easily, and a lot of times it's just kind of shocking. Like, I want to just kind of reiterate what happened in this story. Pharaoh has a dream. He can't interpret it. So he grabs this random guy from prison, okay? They shave him and make him look presentable. They stick him in the court. He interprets the dream, and Pharaoh goes, okay, you're my second in command. All right. I don't know that Pharaoh always picked his second in commands from prison. I don't know if that was the habit that Pharaoh made, but I mean, God makes crazy things happen, right? Like Joseph went from the dungeon to immediately dressed in fine linens. Like that is how quick God can change a circumstance. I read something this week. I get in the habit where I read. I have really good reading and comprehension. And sometimes that is a pitfall because what happens is you read something and you just assume you know what it means. And so I kind of try to watch that in myself and I try to go, well, I do feel like I know what it means, but let me read some commentary on stuff. Let me see if some other people maybe have a perspective I didn't possibly consider, right? And one of the things I read was just that God uses, this guy wrote it in a commentary. I don't know his name. If I did, I would give him credit. So I'm sorry, whatever guy wrote this. But he said, he basically said that God uses these trials and these sufferings to prepare us. Sometimes he uses these things to prepare us for future work that he has for us. Okay? And hear me out. For some, that's really, really difficult to hear because whatever happened to them, whatever trial or suffering they went through was really, really terrible. And so then to tell them that somehow God allowed that terrible thing to happen because he's going to use it for good later almost feels like a slap in the face, right? Like, why would God allow that? How could he possibly do that? But I want to point out something else that this guy is suggesting when he says that these trials are preparations for us. What he's suggesting is that God, that God gives purpose and meaning to the sufferings and the trials that we endure, all right? Because hear me out. If you get to a point in which you're just mad at God and you're like, hey, God, if you were really a good God, if you really loved me, how could you let all these bad things happen to me, right? Somehow we get into that mindset or we start walking down that road and we somehow twist it into our sin is God's fault. That's pretty much what happens, right? We know that God made us perfect. He hates evil more than we do. He did not want sin in the world, but Adam had a choice, Eve had a choice, and they chose to reject God in that moment, which started sin. And sin has infected the rest of us, and it's our sinful, rebellious hearts, right, that cause these things to happen in our world. It's why evil is there. It's why it happens, because sin has affected everything in creation. We know this, and yet somehow we still get in this mindset of, well, God, if you really loved me, you wouldn't do this to me, or you wouldn't allow this to happen. And somehow the consequences of sin are his fault, not our fault, right? But here's the problem when you get into that mindset, is that if you say, well, there is no God, because if there was a God, he would act better and these horrible things wouldn't happen. When you say there is no God, then that means we have no innate purpose, we have no innate value. And so in turn, your struggles, your sufferings have no innate value or no purpose. So what you really come down to when you say, hey, God, you're not real, otherwise you wouldn't allow these things. What you're really saying is that my suffering is meaningless and useless. And really the only reason we suffer, because there's no God, the only reason we suffer is because the universe likes pain and suffering. However we were created, however you want to say we came about, apparently the universe enjoys for us to suffer, or the way that things are, we're all made with this innate want to suffer and have pain, because when you look around, there's a lot of it. And the crazy thing is that not only do I have to endure this pain and suffering, and not only was my first pain and suffering useless and meaningless because it has no value, but then I can guarantee you you're going to suffer again, and that second suffering also will be meaningless and useless and have no value. That is what we say when we say, God, you must be too mean. There's no way you would allow that to me. We're basically saying, well, my sufferings, they must be useless. But when you look at it on the other side, and you focus on what this man is saying, which is that God uses those trials to prepare us, you get an opposite view of suffering and trials. See, God doesn't necessarily go send evil into your life, but he knows that things will happen, and some of those things he allows, and he allows them because he knows that he can use them for good later on. And suddenly, we're not suffering for meaningless, useless, we're not suffering and our suffering is meaningless and useless and it's nothing, but instead, suddenly God has given us innate value and purpose. And so in turn, he has also given our sufferings and our trials innate value and purpose. And we deserve this suffering because of the sin, right? We talked about this. Our consequence for sin is death, it's suffering. So we deserve this suffering, but because God is gracious and merciful, he doesn't just abandon us in our suffering. He doesn't leave us in our suffering, but he in turn uses that suffering to strengthen us and encourage us, knowing that he will use it for good and use it for his glory later. Look at the story of Joseph as an example. God allowed his brothers to sell him into slavery to get him to Egypt. He allowed him to be falsely accused and thrown into prison so that he could meet the cupbearer and the baker. He allowed the cupbearer to forget him until the appointed time when Pharaoh has a dream, and then the cupbearer remembers him. And then he allowed the cupbearer to remember so that Joseph could be brought forward, so that when a famine is about to hit Egypt, Joseph could be a saving lifeline for them by giving them grace and having mercy on them so they could prepare for this famine and they wouldn't be surprised. Notice how in the moment those trials seem really, really horrible and they don't seem great at all. But the whole time, it's not so much that God is sending evil into Joseph's life, as much as that God is having grace and kindness toward him. And he's so good that he's going to take that struggle and he's going to use it for good in the future. It gives a different ring to Romans 5. I know we just got out of Romans, but I'm telling you, it's a good book, y'all. Romans 5, it says, 3-5, it says, not only so, this is what Paul says. He says, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. This is why you hear multiple authors in the New Testament talk about they glory in their sufferings. By no means do I suggest that you should pretend everything is okay, and you should give fake answers. If a person asks you, are you fine? You're just like, yeah, I'm fine, even though you're hurt. No, it's okay to have grief. It's okay to experience the anguish and the hurt that goes with trials. There's nothing wrong with that. But there should be encouragement knowing that the trial, whatever you're facing, it's not meaningless. It's not useless. You're not just suffering because somebody thinks it's fun. But instead, whatever you're suffering, whatever you're going through, God not only will be with you through it and get you through it, he will then turn around and some way, somehow take that bad thing and use it for your good, your blessing, and for his glory. We should be encouraged to know that our God will use our trial and will use our pain to make us stronger and to teach us and to ultimately carry out his will. Let me pray for us.